Welcome back to the Goku Report. And this time I thought, of course, recently I did a special top 20 list, or rather, 10 good, 10 negative. So in total, 20 video I looked at 10 bands I thought were horrible and 10 bands that I thought were great in music. So with a similar theme, it's going to be a new 20 list, but this is going to be 10 failed companies or businesses and 10 successful businesses. So with that said, we're going to look at the positive side first, and then we'll look at the businesses that have failed. Either they no longer exist, or they are definitely currently in free fall, looking from a business standpoint. So with that said, first up of the 10 successful, and there's enough businesses to do another one of these in the future, but first up the successful, and there's no real ranking, keep in mind. So the first of the 10 successful businesses is a restaurant chain that remains private instead of a public traded company, and I think that has allowed it to do more experimentation with things, and they have done a much better job at getting younger clientele, specifically like the 20 and 30 age range demographics. So like we're talking millennials and like the oldest of like the Generation Z. So the first, that is the well-known large restaurant, or rather seafood restaurant chain, Red Lobster, which has had many signature things that define it, besides being obviously things like actual lobster, or like different types of obviously shrimp, as well as crab legs. Of course, their key signature is their cheese biscuits, obviously. But it has been very successful, and they've done a much better job than many other sit-down restaurants, at least when it comes to targeting a younger clientele. They've been a little bit smart, and they've been a lot better, I think, from a marketing standpoint. It is surprising that they still are doing very well to this day. Next on the list is, of course, basically the definition for a fast food burger chain, and that is McDonald's. Obviously the most successful, even if I'm not personally a big fan of McDonald's, especially after you watch a lot of stuff like documentaries like Super Size Me or Food Inc., then you'll understand. But still, they've managed to define a specific elements that make them distinctive from any other fast food chain. Whether it be the Big Mac, having the extra bun in the middle, or whether it be the Chicken McNugget, or whether it be other stuff. But as well as their apple pies. But these are elements that help define them from any other fast food burger chain out there. Besides, there are over 30, I think last time I checked, like 34,000 locations worldwide, which is bonkers. But yes, it's still arguably very successful and still growing, which is crazy to think after all these years. Next up, we are looking at a chain that was definitely in the 90s into early 2000s in decline, but they put more quality into their ingredients, better quality pizzas and everything like that, and experimenting with newer technology and stuff. Coming in at next up on the list is Domino's Pizza. Personally, Domino's is arguably my personal favorite, probably of larger pizza chains, is by far my personal favorite. When it comes to smaller chains, my personal favorite is a smaller local chain company called Geno's Pizza and Pasta. But nevertheless, Domino's is doing very well and has evolved with the times, and I can say taste-wise, they blow most of the other bigger franchises out of the water. Coming in next, we are looking at another private chain in the fast food industry, though. Their definition is they have many signature things like McDonald's to define them, being very different. The first of which, they are specifically known very well for their chicken sandwich, as well as their chicken tenders and stuff, as well as, personally, I don't really go to this place just because I disagree with them on some things, but quality-wise, yeah, I would say they are definitely one of probably the better quality chains, at least when it comes to the quality of their chicken and everything, yeah. And their best well-known signature is their waffle fries. Next up, very successful chains is Chick-fil-A. Arguably very successful, and I don't see that slowing down the fact where I live. Within probably a 20-minute drive of me, there's like 3 Chick-fil-A's. So, yeah. Needless to say, Chick-fil-A is very successful and does very good where I am, anyways. Next up, we are looking at a chain that originally started in Germany. It has grown to become one of the dominant grocery store chains here in America. They've become very well known for pretty good quality on things such as produce is one of the big things for them. But they run things a much more, I would say, fast and efficient and cleaner from many other, like, larger grocery store chains. That being a very successful company's Aldi's. Aldi's grocery stores is honestly good, and I am happy genuinely that there are 2 Aldi's not far from me. So, personally, I do really like Aldi's, especially for getting things, like I said, like vegetables, produce and stuff. Good place to go if you're wanting to make fresh salads and things like that. Perfect place. And their deals are really good. And they are very clean and efficient. Next up, not necessarily as overall clean and stuff per se, but they are known for evolving with the times and evolving the technology they use. And they're usually at the forefront when it comes to grocery store chains. And that is a chain that's very successful. I mean, probably within 30 minutes of me, there's like about 5 or 6 of them. That is, next up, Kroger's. Kroger's, which is a chain that has been around well over 120, like, up to like 130 years or so. Like, they are arguably one of the oldest companies that still exists here in America. And not one bit surprised. I mean, personally, I've always had very good experiences with Kroger. I mean, that's where I do the majority of my, actually, grocery shopping is Kroger's. But, personally, I've never had, as with a company, I've never had any issues with them, and I genuinely do highly recommend, honestly, doing business with Kroger. I think it's a good company, for the most part. But they still remain very successful, which is crazy. Next up, looking at more the clothing side of things, a company where I get a lot of my shirts and stuff I wear in these videos. F4 of companies is Hot Topic, which is once upon a time evolved a little bit more on like CDs and music and stuff, and even for a time they sold vinyls. Unfortunately, the guy was selling really music and focused more on their main demographic of where they make most of their profit. Clothing. Obviously, they would come up out of the same scene of like Spencer's, but they would define themselves more as a alternative clothing store rather than Spencer's, which is bigger into like the novelty type stuff and some adult related things they sell. But personally, I've always liked Hot Topic, and I think that's because the fact they do target a very different clientele than most clothing stores. That is why they succeed, and why they remain very successful to this day. I mean, honestly, the Hot Topic in my local mall, they're always busy. And I'm not one bit surprised, in all honesty. Also, coming in next is a company that needs no introduction. It is a juggernaut when it comes to retail. They've basically been the king of brick and mortar, and by the way, all these lists put together of brick and mortar stores. So, I'm not looking at anything that's predominantly online only, so no, of course, Amazon or anything like that. But next is on the list, Walmart, because predominantly brick and mortar store, though there's been more and more pushing in the online shopping side of things. Plus, of course, the big thing with the pickup program, like grocery shopping and stuff like that with their pick up and go, which has been very successful, honestly, at all the local Walmarts. I am around here, I'm genuinely surprised at how much business they do on their online pickup. Not necessarily the greatest service, but because of the fact that it is considered more convenient for some people who maybe are constantly working, have like a big family or a lot of kids and stuff, and they don't always have the spare time to do a lot of shopping and stuff. This is good for that clientele. So, next up, looking at a company that has definitely grown bigger and bigger over time and become quite successful. It started out much more like, say, I would say, well, like Sam's Club and stuff, but has actually far surpassed Sam's Club in success amount of stores and everything, and that is obviously Costco. It's the second to last on the list of successful businesses, in my opinion. Costco continues to grow and get bigger, and the fact that they actually do tend to do a little bit better, I would say, at having more loyalty from their employees and stuff, that is a very key importance. Last on the successful side of things is a company that has been around a long time in retail / selling prescription drugs, and that is Walgreens. Very successful company and just keeps growing to this day. The fact pretty much it's down to now just Walgreens and CVS, and that's it. Because Walgreens, of course, took over Rite Aid, which has been around since, well, since I can remember, all the way back to the 90s. Like, Rite Aid had been around. Walgreens only had like one location within so far a distance. Today, there's about 12 or 13 Walgreens now within a radius of me. So, needless to say, it's become very dominant and big. Now, on the negative side of things, 10 failed businesses. Like I said, some of these may still exist, but they are a shell of what they once were. The first up is definitely a restaurant chain that I remember when I lived for a few years in Virginia. It was big down there and stuff, and that being Boston Market, which has really failed big time. Money-wise and business perspective, yeah, Boston Market's not doing too well, needless to say, nowadays. And the quality of the food and everything has really gone down. That's the key thing. Because I can remember back in the mid-2000s that Boston Market was actually pretty good. They had great, like, chicken sandwiches and turkey sandwiches and stuff like that. That was their key, and the key thing is also they marketed the fact that they did, like, rotisserie chicken and stuff. That was one of my personal favorite things about Boston Market. It's a shame it's a shell of what it once was, though. Next up is another chain that I went to a lot when I lived in Virginia, Red Robin. Arguably my favorite, probably sit-down place for a burger. I would say after them was probably Ruby Tuesdays, which luckily I can still go to Ruby Tuesday, though personally I have much better experiences with Red Robin. I mean, their steak fries, awesome. Love their Hawaiian burger, was great. But if you never really had the chance to try a Red Robin, if you get a chance, if you can go to one, I highly recommend trying out. I think the burgers are actually really good. The quality was good, at least back then. Don't know now, but I had nothing but good experiences with them personally. Next up is a chain that it barely exists today. That is Chuck E. Cheese. Personally, I never went to a Chuck E. Cheese. Even when I was a kid, we had basically an alternate version of Chuck E. Cheese called Billy Bob's Wonderland. Basically, it's a complete copy of Chuck E. Cheese, because they also use the animatronics and everything, which I think is why things like Five Nights at Freddy's did so well, because there were a lot of people, even if it wasn't Chuck E. Cheese, but something similar. And Billy Bob, by the way, was a bear, so needless to say, yeah. But Chuck E. Cheese, yeah, the quality was never great, from what I understand from people that have been to them. And they definitely overcharge on their food. Next up, looking at a company that still exists, but compared to what they were in the 2000s, they're about, last time I checked, they were probably only about a third of their stores are still around. So yeah, they're like a third of the size they were just about 15 years ago. And it's unfortunate, this would be a company that would end up buying out Suncoast and Sam Goody, which, man, I miss Sam Goody. That being the company FYE. One of the few reasons FYE even still exists, really, and still has about like 500 or 600 locations is because of the online stores. There is still one FYE within 30 minutes of me, which I am happy, as they are one of the few places that you actually had a better variety of music. That was always the biggest thing for me with FYE, was the music selection, whether it be rock or metal. But next, a retailer that needs no introduction, and it's basically almost all but dead now. That being a department store that was big in the 90s, huge, and they were big really going back to the 70s, and sadly today they're almost non-existent. That being Kmart, which for a time there in the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s into 90s, they were basically in a complete out war with Walmart to see who would be the dominant, obviously, department store chain. In the 90s, there would be many casualties of chains going up against Walmart. Kmart just happens to be one of the few that has lasted the longest of opponents. That and the fact they didn't put enough money into their online, unfortunately, is one of the other things that did the demise. The last Kmart where I lived, the last Kmart closed around 2016, 2017. So about 5 years ago, it closed down, the last one in the area. But also looking at another chain that closed down in 2020, that actually, I knew a few people that liked going there, though didn't really appeal to me personally. But I could see why some people would like it for decorations and things. Next up is Pier 1 Import, which it went bankrupt. Basically, it's almost non-existent now. But at one time, like, Pier 1 was actually very successful. Back in the, especially 90s, they were doing very well for themselves. Even into, like, the 2000s, they were doing okay. Sadly, they didn't put enough time into their online store, which is one of the things that really hurt them at the end of the day. And most people ended up going to cheaper alternatives from, like, Pier 1, things like Olives, or other alternatives, as well as, of course, Amazon, eBay, and other things. Next, we are looking at a chain that really hits me hard for nostalgia and stuff. It's still a shame the fact it's not really existent today. And that was something I went to a lot as a kid and teenager, and that is next, KB Toys. Which I genuinely, and I think many people like me that grew up in the 90s really miss this company, as it was a key importance. That is where I bought, like, my yo-yos back in the late 90s, which I'm a big fan of. Pausing. Just an example, a few things I still have from the 90s. Some of my old yo-yos, which I was a big fan of in the 90s. Omega Hyper Warp. Fireball. And, of course, the all-time classic, the X-Spring, which was awesome. Always loved yo-yos back in the 90s. That was one of my favorite things. But that was one of the big things that I remember best about KB Toys, was the yo-yos. As well as many other things like that's where I got into things like Transformers, as well as many other things over the years. And they were known for usually carrying better quality toys than many other retailers. Coming in at next, we're looking at some that really hits hard for me nostalgia-wise, as unfortunately they would end up closing in like 99, which absolutely sucks. or at least the location here closed in '99. That is Hills Department Store, which any of you who grew up in the 80s and 90s remembers Hills, as it was great. That was actually, Hills was actually where I got my, let's hear, yeah. That was actually where I got my N64 from, was from Hills, because their electronics, they were like big time advertising everything about that. Funny enough, they were also advertising, other than that, some called the Tiger Electronics, like Gamecom handheld, which any of you that remember the Gamecom know, but it's not necessarily the greatest quality, to say the least. But yeah, I do have fond memories of Hills, and many things as well as the fact I remember them selling a lot of like Transformer stuff, Mighty Morphin Power Ranger things. But definitely it's something that speaks back to that period as the next up, Blockbuster. Which I went to Blockbuster up until the day they closed. It was convenient because of the fact that it was a Blockbuster close to where I lived was great. The fact I could go to Blockbuster, first order a pizza, walk right across the street to from the pizza place, to pick up a movie from Blockbuster, then walk back over, pick up the pizza, and then go home. It was great and convenient doing that. The fact I could do a movie and pizza, perfect. Sadly, don't really have that now. Now, there are some mom and pop, like, video stores that still exist in Ohio and stuff, and they're lucky. But I genuinely do miss Blockbuster. I have good memories of that, renting video games from Blockbuster, specifically PS1, as well as also renting Dreamcast stuff as well. I miss those days. Number one is a chain that closed around like 2000, 2001. They had like their own rental video store inside, besides a pharmacy, a small amount of food. You could choose like a big Kmart and stuff. It was a department store, and it was the anchor, one of the big anchor stores of one of the local malls, and that being Phar-Mor. If you grew up in the, well, anywhere from probably the 70s to 90s, you probably remember Phar-Mor, as it is unfortunate they are pretty much forgotten about retail chain, just like no one really talks about Hills Department Store anymore, or even Magic Mart either. Though Magic Mart surprisingly still exists, which surprises me. But with that said, that is it for this 20 list, looking at 20 successful and failed businesses. I'll see you next time. Stay safe. Hopefully enjoyed the lo-fi music in the background. I'll see you again soon enough. Here on the Goku Report.